Welcome to the Cinematic Void Podcast. Cinematic Void is a cult film series that hosts screenings in the Los Angeles area as well as virtually. I'm your host, Jim Branscombe, and joining me as always is...
Hey, it's Nick Vance, Paranoid Futures. You can find Cinematic Void on the World Wide Web at cinematicvoid.com, as well as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and all major podcast platforms. If you want to support The Void, you can consider joining our Patreon.
So this is another episode in our film programmer series on the Cinematic Void Podcast, where I'm talking to various film programmers across the country. This one's slightly different because this has to deal with a friend of mine who is a film programmer, but is also on the film exhibition side, where he basically books films for the company AGFA. He is the theatrical sales director of AGFA. He's also the creator and host of Museum of Home Video. Please welcome the Void, Bret Berg. Bret, how are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I just got back from my acupuncturist. I feel a little looser than usual. And thank you for having me on the show and for talking about this topic, because I don't think that enough people talk about it on podcasts. I would love for people to just talk about film programming as often as they talk about film criticism and stuff.
I mean, I love inside baseball, and I know you do too. And this is why I've been excited to be able to just talk. I mean, we talk about this shit all the time when we meet up anyway, but just to kind of document. So I guess to kind of just get into it, could you explain what it means to be the theatrical sales director of AGFA and what you actually do?
Sure. Most people know AGFA as a Blu-ray label and distributed as one of the many partner labels through OCN, Vinegar Syndrome's sister company. And that's perfectly normal for most people to know us because of that, because that's the public-facing part. But we also do a lot of lab work for clients and other labels, restoration, scanning work. And then what I do is I take all the theatrical rights that companies like Arrow and Severin, Vinegar Syndrome, Cult Epics, Trauma, Shout Factory, and Sub Rosa, Screen Time. There's just a long list of labels that we work with, and I email venues all day long, and I try to get our catalog of mostly vintage horror movies onto screens so that rep shows can happen with our catalog. And the catalog is about 1,700 films as we record this in August of 23. And I used to be a film programmer by profession. I was the programming director at Cinefamily here in Los Angeles, where you and I are. Mm-hmm. And that I left in 2015 and then eventually came to work for AGFA, doing the opposite job of what I used to do. I used to be the venue programmer reaching out to distributors to book movies to put on screen. So now I'm the person that those people email to get the movies. And it's been a really fun career to ride both sides of the fence like this. And I also put on film shows in LA too. So I am both an exhibitor and a distributor at the same time. I'm one of the few people on earth, I guess, who can say that.
Can you talk about how you began this whole building up the, basically taking a lot of the boutique labels that a lot of them had loosey theatrical titles and kind of organizing them and getting everyone on the same page, hey, I'm going to make everyone's life easier if there's a one-stop shop for this.
Yeah. So AGFA was a two-person team before I joined it as the third person. This is back in 2017. And right before I joined, Sebastian and Joe, who were running it at the time, they had already conferred with Arrow, Severin, and Vinegar Syndrome separately, I think, to get theatrical rights, because they noticed that whenever they themselves as film programmers wanted to book something, because there's this series Terror Tuesday in Austin where AGFA is based at Alamo Drafthouse, the screening series is. And so Joe just knew from personal experience that it was sometimes difficult to get a film that appears on one of these labels to be booked for a film screening. So I don't know quite the early machinations of it. I've never asked actually what was the original spark. But this library of about 150 titles at the time was sitting, waiting for someone to do something with it. And I had just spent several years as a film programmer, so I came into AGFA thinking I know exactly who to reach out to sell this library to, because all the people that would go to the yearly conference for people who run art house movie theaters called the Art House Convergence, I went to that every year, and I met all the other people who did the thing I did. And then, as programmer of a place that did really hard to find movies often, people from all the other venues would email me saying, "Where did you get that movie?" So I just immediately had to use an ancient term, a whole Rolodex of people to I could sell movies like Santa Sangre and Donnie Darko to. And I don't know, it started from there. And we've reached 1,700 titles, not only because the existing label partners kept giving us more titles, but we just kept acquiring different partners to the point where now I have about 50 of them. And sometimes it's a library where we get 80 films in a chunk. And sometimes it's a single title that we go after because we know that it's really important to add title X or Y into our repertoire, because we know, as programmers, we know certain films will kill with an audience. So we have that knowledge to reach out to the people who own the films that kill. An early reach out partnership for us was Arlene Sedaris, who produced all of the Andy Sedaris movies like Hard Ticket to Hawaii and Picasso Trigger. I knew from booking Hard Ticket to Hawaii directly from Arlene that you had to email Arlene to get it. So I was like, why don't we make that easier? And you don't have to field any of those emails anymore. You just forward them right to us. And that worked out great. And we restored all the Sedaris movies, and we still get to book them. It was really fun. And then also an early partnership after I came on was Don Coscarelli, because I knew as a film programmer at Cinefamily, if you wanted to book Phantasm, you had to email Don, and sometimes he'd get back to you. And so I was like, you know what, we'll just make it easier for you. And what he said to me at the meeting we had with him, I'll never forget this. He goes, yeah, it's always a hassle. Whenever someone emails me to book Phantasm, I have to send my nephew to FedEx to ship the cans out because I don't want to deal with that anymore. And we're like, perfect, let us do that for you. So that's how our theatrical stable grew to this size. We were also influenced by a company called Park Circus, which is one of 6 or 7 major sources for repertory film bookings. They were an aggregated library of libraries, and that's what we immediately aspired to be. And so we set out to do that on our own terms, and here we are.
Now, primarily, you're mostly just DCPs at the moment, but I know AGFA for years had their own like film archive and stuff, and I know it. So when someone books with AGFA, they still, some titles I should say, still have the option for 35, but a lot of it's DCP because a lot of this stuff had never had a theatrical 35 millimeter print at any point ever in the U.S., and if it did, it's long gone.
Yeah, or bruised and battered, or too expensive, or the collector is too weird to let it out, or whatever. You and I have plenty of stories of the collector game, and how, you know, the only people who collect film prints are people who really love the movies, let's just say.
Yeah, it's one thing I want to say about AGFA is because like before AGFA kind of consolidated everyone, like I had to go work individual deals with every single like boutique label and, you know, make sure they had stuff, because I did a lot of like, you know, Blu-ray release premieres and stuff like that. And like, you know, I just like the fact that I can look at a list and see like all these titles and be like, okay, I know where all these are, because it cuts out like as a film programmer and having been on both sides, when you have to deal with someone that's absolutely insane that has the rights to a film and it's the only thing they have, when like, because that's how a lot of these titles used to be. It was just like, you know, someone had this, and then like you would book, and they're like, well, I have the rights, and then become all that kind of stuff. So
I think, are you mainly thinking of one holiday themed title in particular?
Well, but there is that, but there's been other ones, but yeah, there is. I don't know if we can talk about that.
We can't talk about that, but we both know who we're talking about.
Yes.
So
But yeah, it's wild, and like it just makes like this side of it, especially cult film side, so much easier. And I think Park Circus is a good example, because, you know, Park Circus basically controls MGM and like all the things MGM owns, which is like Orion and like Canon and things like that. And I think I know when Warner got bought out by Discovery, they ended up taking over most of the Warner Brothers repertory, at least the 35 millimeter end of it. So,
oh yeah, the 35. So what Warner Brothers has done, which no other studio has done, and I don't know if it's better or worse, is that they've automated the process of their bookings. So they have a really responsive team, but it's not exactly the same kind of relationship that a venue booker has with their distributor
Yeah.
necessarily. And yeah, I think Park Circus has offloaded all the 35 operation, or no, Warner Brothers has offloaded the 35 to Park Circus to deal with, which honestly might have freed up more stuff.
Yes, I definitely has. Like, I mean, not that it was a Warner title, but like the fact that I put a request for Night Game and they're like, we don't have a print. And then Chris from Park Circus wrote about it, like, oh, we found one. It's in Iron Mountain. And like when we got that print, it was an answer print that was struck in 2003 of Night Game with Roy Scheider from '89. No idea why in 2003 they struck an answer print, but I'm pretty sure it never had been played. It was like one of the best looking prints I've ever seen.
Let's imagine it was like for a DVD release.
I'm assuming it was for the DVD release, and then like they just forgot they had it. Now, as you're working in your booking, how many bookings do you look at a week from like all the venues? Because there is a lot of repertory, houses across the country, and there's also micro cinemas, and you have people that are just like even doing like little offsite like bar screenings and things like that. Like, what's the number of bookings you're dealing with on a week-to-week basis?
I tend not to think week to week. I think month to month, mainly because of this season right now, like late summer, as our busiest season as people prepare for their October seasons, their venues, horror wise, of course. But month to month, like the last 2 months in a row, we got about, now it's not the number of emails I'm dealing with necessarily, but the number of line items on a ledger that are individual movie titles. I would say about 250 a month.
Wow.
And that's ramped up because we're in the highest season of the year for us usually. So this year, in the early part of the year, was about 200 a month. Whereas in 2019, with the last good year of data that I had, let's say, it was about like 150. So definitely, I think all the data that I have and all the anecdotal things that I talk about with programmers and distributors makes me feel like more people are going out to rep cinema than in 2019.
I fully agree with it. Like statistically, this is my best year since I've started doing every Monday. And I know from talking to like other people we know, like Mark at the Coolidge and things like that, like their rep titles are just doing astronomical. And what do you think is the shift with like the shift for more like, obviously there's still big theatrical events like, Barbenheimer just happened, but
oh yeah.
But
the first time I've been to a movie on opening weekend since the 2000s, by the way, which is Barbie. I somehow saw it on the Sunday of its opening weekend and had a good time. And it gave me the fever to go out to more new movies, which I have not felt since the 2000s.
Do you think that like it's basically we're coming out of kind of like the hibernation phase of the post lockdown world, or do you think it's like people are actually just craving like going to the movies again, but they want to go see something that they either feel like that experience is going to be meant for them, or they want to try something new, or where do you think it kind of lands?
There's so many different prongs to this pitchfork.
Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, well, first and foremost is yes, the lockdown era permanently changed a generation of movie going, for the worse at first and now for the better, because we're experiencing this big wave of more people going out to rep cinema because of the audience getting younger is a huge one. So put yourself in the mindset of someone who is 22 right now. 10 years ago, going out to the movies meant going to see the Avengers with your parents. And now that they're a little bit older and perhaps have disposable income in their pocket to go out and do stuff post-lockdown, a lot of kids are choosing rep cinema because it is such a wide open playing field. Right now, if you're 22, you have access to 10 times as many movies as you and I did at that age. We had home video and cable and rep cinema, and that was 10 times as many movies we had access to at that time as our parents, who, when they were younger, only had TV and movie theater. So there's no possible way that a 22-year-old will have seen anything that's playing in rep cinema, because there's just way too many movies to do that with. And something like Letterboxd specifically creates a social media FOMO layer to needing to be conversant in a wide swath of things. And actually, you know what? I will put that as like anyone from 20 to 60 is using, who are letterbox users, have created a FOMO for themselves to push themselves to see more movies. Now, whether that is healthy for the individual, I don't know. It's incredible for our business. And I can't complain about it, but it is a reality why more people are going out to rep cinema. And yeah, like, when you go out, you have a choice between bars and restaurants and nightclubs and rep cinemas and other things, life theater, or whatever. And tons of people fell in love with movies all over again, or for the first time during the lockdown era, when they'd had a year and a half to really focus on movies that they could get into. So I don't know, at my series, which is at Alamo DTLA every Wednesday, I always ask, because I always like getting this little thrill of how many people are seeing this for the first time, not just in a theater, but for the first time. And nearly everyone raises their hand, no matter what movie it is, no matter how old they are. There was one movie that I showed a couple weeks ago where both myself and not a person in the room had seen it before. It was Lucio Fulci's The Psychic.
Oh, that's an incredible movie. It's an incredible movie. Like, I've seen The Psychic. I've never seen it in a theater. So, and that's the new Severin restoration, right?
Correct. Now, as a programmer, you're not really supposed to show stuff you've never seen before, because as a modern programmer, movies that we love, exploitation, horror, vintage, tend to have really explosive things in them emotionally, where you have to prepare an audience ahead of time. Right. So you want to, as a programmer, I'm just saying this for anyone who wants to get like casually, you need to pre-screen anything you will be showing, because I hope that conversations like this inspire people to do programming where they are.
Yes. I mean, that's kind of the bigger picture. And since you talked about introducing and like that kind of stuff, let's talk about intro styles, because I've run into the thing now that, like, there's a lot of things I show, and I'm talking about staples where people were seeing it for the first time. Like, like last year, I always bring up Night of the Living Dead, because like almost the whole entire audience hadn't seen Night of the Living Dead, and I sat in the back and I watched the audience kind of get into it and like get invested in Ben, and I'm just like, I wonder how they're gonna feel at the end of this movie when he gets shot. And like, you could feel the air get sucked out of the room and them being devastated by like that dark ending. And I love sitting in the back, and it's like I'm watching the movie, but I'm watching the audience kind of get into the first time. And
yes, that's what in order to be continually good at this over time, like from one era into the next, you really have to pay attention to audience tastes and how they react. And if you give them something that they don't react to, and I don't mean like fist pumping or anything, but something they emotionally react to positively or negatively, if there's not enough of those in the movie, you probably shouldn't show the movie again, because it's not gonna, there won't be any repeat business on movie X if it's just sits there.
I mean, I just did Class of 1984 like this week as we're recording, and like I watched the audience really get into it, and like there's some, how do I put it nice, some problematic and triggering stuff that happens in that movie, like most 80s exploitation movies. But when it got to the final title card of it, and I don't want to say it for those who haven't seen it, but like, because it's set up throughout the movie of like, this is a thing that happens, when that title, like the audience just busted out cheering and applauding. And like, it's kind of great that I could get that out of Class of 1984, or like just any kind of weird exploitation movie. Because like, I guess this kind of transitions back to the intro style. So like, what I like to give context, but I don't like to spoil, especially exploitation movies. I do want to warn people if there's going to be things in there's not going to be, that could be offensive or could mess with their sensibilities or like be triggering, but I don't want to spoil it, because I've of the mind that exploitation movies, when they came out in the 70s, were just as problematic and had as many issues back then as they do now. And I don't want to disarm one of the things that the movie's designed to do by, spelling everything out. But I'm also mindful that people need to be warned in some way. And I might just say, it's going to be gnarly, it's going to be rough. So if you feel uncomfortable, feel free to leave or something like that, just because, I don't want anyone to have a bad time, but also understand the movie might be designed for you to have a bad time.
As so many movies were back then.
Yeah.
Well, so I personally believe that the new cult canon is a swath through the jungle of movies where you don't have to set it up that hard to begin with.
Yeah.
And it's not saying that we need to dumpster. I'm just going to use Last House on the Left as an example of something
Yes.
that is like designed to push people's buttons. You don't have to show it in order to celebrate it
Yeah.
necessarily. You can talk about how other movies that you would show are influenced by it, but you don't necessarily have to show it. And if you do show it, what I like to do is just give an entire blanket statement that covers all of like human creativity
Yeah.
and say what we are about to see, not just part of it, but all of it is from the 1970s. That's an inescapable fact of this movie, that it is time stamped with values that are not ours today. So proceed accordingly.
Yeah.
And give them a kind of like a bailiff kind of like just quick note spoken towards the floor, basically like all rise, pay attention for this 5 seconds, and people get the message. And I think, well, and anyway, I think that the Alamo Drafthouse Los Angeles audience is very self-selecting to begin with. And also the rooms are, it's just a factor of this particular venue that the rooms are all 50 seats.
Yeah.
So when you have a room of 200 plus people, or 130 as you do at the Los Feliz 3, you don't have time to scan every single person's face.
Yeah.
50-seater, you are looking at every single person's face when you get up there and you talk. So you have the chance to be a little bit more intimate with what you're saying, and maybe a little bit more carefree with, how you whimsically treat things that are going to show up in the movie that are fucking horrifying and not from today. But I just tend to like, what a docent would say about a shocking painting from the 1600s. It's like, well, they believe this, the Spanish Inquisition happened. Wasn't that wild? Like, they did that then. We don't do that now.
I mean, the easiest answer for the 70s is like cocaine was a lot more potent and a lot more cleaner back then. And the effect that it had on actors, filmmakers, and everyone involved in the film industry is right on the screen for you to witness.
Right. Now, I think, all of us are big fans of certain 80s movies because of their cocaine quotient. Like, yeah. I'm hugely guilty of that. I really do think in the rear view that it's cocaine mixed with booze that gave us the 70s movies.
No, I think you're right, because they had to be on that high, but then they had to cut that high to get through some, like, there's a lot of like drama and stuff like that, and you can't be like flying high that whole movie. You gotta bring it back. So maybe a little weed, a little bourbon, just to kind of even it out.
I'm talking about hardcore drinking culture. Like if you just casually in a 60s movie, when you see characters at someone's house and they're starting to mix drinks and you watch the size of the pour of the drink, go back and watch the Bad Feed from the late 50s, because there is a scene in there where someone's like, can I fix you a whiskey or something? And the lady goes, yeah. And then he pours what is like a small Coke at a theater sized drink. So everyone was just used to getting Mad Men style plastered, and then 70s came along, and then Coke is dropped on top of the booze. That gives us like feel bad. That gives us a chainsaw for sure.
Yeah,
like, heat plus booze plus Coke equals Leatherface.
That is probably the best way I've ever heard the 70s described. And like, as a person that loves giallo cinema and like everything's drenched in J&B whiskey or Scotch whiskey, it's like, especially if you watch like, Carol Baker and Orgasmo, and the amount of J&B she drinks in that movie is just like, is that humanly possible? But if you actually go and watch a lot of movies from that era, everyone's drinking like that. I think it's just, I think the only difference between that movie and other movies is because she's like, oh, I need a drink, when she's already had like a full like pint glass of like Scotch at that point.
People's tolerances were way higher. We would be shocked at the amount our grandparents drank.
Yeah, I think it's just that, again, it's a different world and a different environment, and plus, it's the world in cinema and things change. So when you put your programming hat on versus your distributor hat, what do you look for into like what movies you pick and end up screening, especially on the Wednesdays of the Draft House?
Well, a lot of the titles, the original mandate a year ago, because my hero of this situation, Jake Isgar from Alamo Drafthouse, asked me in like April last year, do you want to think about doing a series at Alamo? And I hadn't thought about rep cinema like me myself programming
Yeah.
it at all since before the lockdown, because I just assumed it was never going to happen again. I just, I had a very just like hands-off view of it until it sort of circled around back to me. And then Jake said, well, you want to just do just a series of all the stuff you have in your AGFA catalog every week? And I said, yeah, selfishly because I wanted to get more AGFA titles playing in LA, but also it was my chance to do the thing I used to do that I hadn't really done since Cine Family Time, which is where I get time slots and I have to fill time slots with something, as opposed to like, I'm going to drop in here and do a single event or something like that. So I just went nuts on my own catalog and then very slowly started to work in one thing a month from like Universal or Park Circus or Warner Brothers, whatever. And then sometimes I'll have a whole month where I want to theme it. I don't theme things very often. I don't think themes help me personally get behind and promote stuff, but I know that themes work for a lot of people and that's important. But a theme month I had recently was all 2000s sci-fi horror. So we did Doom, Splice, and Daybreakers. I wanted to throw Stealth into the mix, but I ran out of a fourth time slot. We only had 3 that month. So that's all stuff outside my catalog. But I do love the movies in my catalog. So it's a nice thing to have Reanimator in the pocket if I really needed it. But it's a mixture of horror and cult. I'm starting to listen to what other people are interested in terms of like what would get an audience of 50 people to come. Like I haven't booked Skinamarink yet, but I have it on the docket for a few months for now. There was no way I was ever going to watch that, I don't think, unless enough people around me said that I should check it out. So
I wasn't a fan of that one, but I might be one of the lone dissenters on that one. But we'll save that discussion for another day.
Sure.
I do want to mention, because I think we both have screened it this year, is we both showed Tightrope at some point. So I'm kind of curious about how your Tightrope screening, because I want to compare notes. And plus, like I was at the Music Box in Chicago when our friend Will Morris put it in for January Giallo. So I do want to briefly talk about the Tightrope renaissance that we've been spearheading here.
Well, I'm stoked to talk about Clint's movies, let's say, because I find him endlessly fascinating. Part of film programming is knowing when to, especially if you're there just to do a series and you're not on staff of the venue necessarily. Jim, it's been both sides for you.
Yeah.
So I tend to let the house do things that are convenient for the house whenever possible, because it just allows me to sort of keep doing what I'm doing. And one of those is Tightrope, because Jake had booked it at Alamo, San Francisco, and Brooklyn, I think, and he wanted to get a little print circuit going. And I think it was the same circuit as when it hit. It must have been the same circuit as when it hit the Music Box.
Yeah, because Music Box was January. I ended up doing February. That Warner Brothers has more than one print of it, which is impressive.
That's funny. So the short answer was Tightrope was not my pick, but I knew that it was a pick that worked within my framework. So I was like, why not? And especially if the house is offering 35 in a situation where I can't always book 35 because the specific room situations at Alamo. So I was like, fuck yes, let's show Clint's version of cruising. Absolutely. And I was not there for the show because I host about 2/3 of my shows. It's whenever I can get down there, but sometimes, with 2 jobs and like a life going on, it's like hard to be there every time.
When I did it, so the way Will sold Tightrope was, you want to see oiled up Clint Eastwood ass?
Oh yes, well that's really the thing to grab people.
Yeah.
If you want to make them understand Pavlovian style why they need to like watch this movie.
I just know when that scene happened in the actual screening, when I did it, like people were like, because the way it's like, it's very like sexualized, like you're like panning up a woman, and then once you get up and realize it's Clint Eastwood, there was this amazing shock moment where I think everyone just froze, like, wow, that is a nice oiled up ass.
Yeah, well, it's not the only time he's shown his ass in one of his movies. When I saw Tightrope for the first time, which was during the lockdown and was the thing that kicked off my lockdown viewing of all the other Clint directed movies I could get my hands on.
Hmm.
Uh, yeah, when I saw it was in my boyfriend's living room when I saw it, and I gasped. I was like, "Oh my God! I never thought I would see the shiny crack of one of cinema's iconic heroes." Um, and so the other movie that he shows his ass in is Space Cowboys, in which he shows James Garner's ass, Donald Sutherland's ass, and Tommy Lee Jones' ass all in the same shot.
That's pretty impressive. That's a lot of Oscar caliber ass right there.
Oh yeah, the movie is fun. I don't know if most people like us at the time when we were practically children, the idea of Clint Eastwood's Armageddon, like it's the same plot as Armageddon, except it's fucking old people instead
Yeah.
of like Bruce Willis and Steve Buscemi. There's like they're going through the whole NASA physical regimen,
Mm.
and at one point there's a shot with all their asses lined up in the frame symmetrically, as if Wes Anderson placed them there.
I haven't seen Space Cowboys since I was a kid, and probably when I saw it with my dad. Now I need to revisit it just for that.
Oh, it's
I
sick. Like the opening 10 minutes is set in sepia tone, and it's like when everybody is in like the Korean War era time. But all the young actors are dubbed over by the elderly actors.
oh
So
man,
bring elderly Tommy Lee Jones's voice come out of like a 25-year-old's mouth on screen. It's weird. It's very weird. It's a gentle Armageddon. But what's not to like? You know?
I love Clint as a director. He's probably the most solid craftsman filmmaker that's ever in cinema. The fact that like he'll come in under budget, he'll do like no more than like 2 takes, and
Mm-hmm.
they're genuinely good. I know maybe probably the last decade or so it's been spotty, but like, I mean, it's
No,
admirable. Oh, are you gonna say no?
well, I was going to say I was significantly impressed with Richard Jewell. Here's the thing that I wasn't expecting to like. All three of the lead performances are incredible. It's a fun movie for a depressing ass subject. Uh, I don't know, and there's something I don't know. Sam Rockwell, Kathy Bates, and then the guy playing Richard Jewell, whose name I'm forgetting. They are like an amazing on-screen trio. It's like people love the Three Amigos for no reason. It's like another one of those where it's like three people on screen together.
All right, now I need to see Richard Jewell. I was actually out of a lot of the later last decade Clint stuff. That was the one of the ones I was really interested in. Just because I don't know. It's just like I just love that he just doesn't give a fuck. He's like, all right, we're gonna be done by 4 p.m. every day, so I can go like play golf or have a glass of wine or whatever.
There's a run of Clint movies from late 90s to early aughts that I got particularly obsessed with during lockdown, and they are Absolute Power 97, True Crime 99, Space Cowboys 2000, and Bloodwork 2002. It's like a airport novel kind of movie.
I mean, I in a way, Clint does make the perfect airplane movie on top of it because it's just like it gets to the point. There's no bullshit. You don't have to cut anything out for like really. It's just the economical power of Clint Eastwood as a director is like no one else can do.
Yeah, and he's famous for only doing a single take. Like he shoots the rehearsal, and then he'll go like, "Okay, we'll change this and this," and then they'll do a take, and then that's it. It's kind of like if you're a fan of post punk, it's kind of like Marky Smith in The Fall, uh, or Altman. It's just like we got it, moving on. No need to belabor.
I'm
And
sure I'm sure you heard the Scatman Crothers story about working with Clint Eastwood after working with Stanley Kubrick, right?
oh no, was he in Honky Tonk?
I forget.
What?
I can't remember which movie Scatman was in. I should know it, but like, so Scatman did The Shining, and obviously got hit with that axe like 60, 80 times, whatever Kubrick did. I know everyone always wants to talk about like Shelley Duvall and how she was treated on the movie. It's like no, Scatman had to do that fucking scene where he died like 80 times to the point he was crying and wanted to stop. So he does a Clint Eastwood movie. They do a take. Clint's like, all right, cut, print, we're moving on. And Scatman starts crying. He's like, oh, thank you. That's it. He's like, yeah, you were good. We're done. Why do another take?
Yeah, the only time he'll do a second take is if someone bumps the camera or some shit.
I mean, it's just so economic. It's amazing. I like how we just derailed talking about Clint the director, but that is important because that's
But
part
that's
of the
why we like him. The
yeah.
reason I'm so into this run of 4 movies that I listed is because it's very obvious that what you're watching is the first take of everything, even more so than your cookie cutter TV. It's fascinating. There's a shot in Bloodwork where it's so obvious it's on the Burbank Warner Brothers backlot. They made no effort to make it look like anything but a backlot. And it's the shot is this like 20-second shot and it's all in one take. They like move the camera around a little bit, and it's just this like lazy half master, and he comes over to this crime scene and he's like, "Ugh," and then he walks away, and then that's the scene. I'm like, wow, that didn't build the story or the character. It's just like we needed to have this A to B to C, and I respect him for doing the equivalent of like romance novels where it's turned out in 3 days.
I guess it's good to talk about Clint Eastwood because, like, as on the film programming side, do you find there are some things that are harder sells to, like, screen theatrically as opposed to maybe like 20 years ago? Like, obviously, horror is never going to go out of style, but I do think like certain filmmakers and certain like subgenres kind of come its ebb and flow in how they do. And like, have you noticed that with just the AGFA catalog? I mean, obviously, you have some action stuff, and you have like you have a whole shitload of things in there. Do you notice at one point like a genre will get hot for a little bit and then kind of die down and then maybe something else comes up, or is it just
Yeah,
more
well,
just
yeah, it's definitely cyclical and also in waves, and something that was in vogue might not come back again. Like I don't think that the 70s Corman stuff has much of a life left outside of institutional film programming, like at a museum or university or something like that. I just don't see the box office receipts rolling in for Star Crash anymore, sadly. But things like Giallos, which I was not expecting to have such an interest in from the programming public, thanks to you and other folks who are into the genre, that has definitely been foregrounded a lot. I think certainly AGFA's particular access to these movies that we grant to the venues is definitely helping that.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, we can talk a little bit about January Giallo and just like because AGFA made that easier because like all those movies, like even if there were prints, it was a mess to figure out who had what or whatever. And plus,
Mhm.
like one of the things that was instrumental in be able to like kind of spread out to other venues was working with you and like finding other venues who would be interested in like kind of making packages and stuff.
Yeah,
Which
we're approaching our window of time again for next year, by the way.
Oh, I know. So we'll have another call. We'll have another
Yeah, yeah.
talk about that because I know there's a few other venues that want to jump on board.
Well, I have a something that I wanted to talk about because it was a rep screening that I hosted yesterday, and it's been on
Okay.
my mind. And it's something that you also brought up, but also um, feel free to cut this bit if you don't want to give away the ghost.
No, that's
Of it.
fine.
Is probably you should sprinkle a couple spaghetti westerns in the mix of giallos and consider it one genre, sort of, because yesterday we showed Metallo, or is it
Hmm.
pronounced Matalo? I think Alex pronounced it Matalo, so we'll go with that. From 1970. I personally thought it was so good that I could officially say that it rocked me.
Wow.
And it's a film with almost no dialogue at all. They get away with like intense camera moves, which communicate all the emotional components of the scene a lot of the time. It's fascinating. I loved it. And if you had 2 years ago told me, Brett, you're one of your favorite rep finds of the year is a spaghetti western, I would have gone, you're lying. But because I typically hate's a strong word. I don't watch westerns because of their ASMR components. I think that the clomping hooves and the gunshots and the saloon noises and all that shit, it just gets on my nerves and I can't deal with it. But this one was perfect for me. And I think that people understand maybe the spaghetti western thing through the giallo lens a little better because they are both incredibly nihilistic and equally as violent and often as interesting and funny if you get the right ones in combination, I think.
Yeah, and I've been kind of toying with doing spaghetti westerns at some point on their own because outside of the Leone stuff, which is like traditionally what people come out for. Occasionally, you have people like if there's a Django screening, you'll occasionally get that, or like some of the other Sergio Corbucci stuff. But like because the thing that people forget is a lot of the people that made giallo films also made spaghetti westerns and then went on to make Euro crimes because that's how Italy worked. They would hop on their genre trend for like maybe like 4 to 6 years, and then eventually when the parody came out, where it was like a comedy that killed the genre, and they went on to the next, which I always thought was interesting. It was like, Argento's kind of the rare exception because, like, outside of maybe his historical comedy, he pretty much stayed in one lane the whole time. But like everyone from Roberto Lenzi, Sergio Martino, they
Fulci.
were, yeah, Fulci, yeah. People forget Fulci made sex comedies, he made westerns, he made Eurocrime. And I also love it when they would make one of those films like way past the prime of it. Like, Fulci did Contraband in like 1980, and it's like him doing his gore aesthetic on a Eurocrime movie. So when people get shot, they really get fucking shot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, whether this is a prediction that will come true or whether it's total smoke I'm blowing, maybe these three like big categories, Italian crime, spaghetti westerns, giallo, it doesn't need to all be pushed into one umbrella that is then sold as the umbrella as an exciting thing you can see at a rep cinema is Italian wildness, not necessarily just horror.
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say this as a fan of a lot of these movies is that I kind of wish more people would like take a dive on the Eurocrime or the spaghetti western, because they're just as insane and fucked up as the giallo films. It's just either you're wearing a fucking cowboy hat or you are ripping off Dirty Harry or The French Connection.
I feel really dumb because in the AGFA's catalog, I have something like 20 or 25 Italian crime movies, or maybe I'm exaggerating, but a number that's bigger than 8.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know anything about any of them. And the same thing with spaghetti westerns. I just get to pick them off one a year and get excited about it and then don't watch anymore.
Well, it's something to kind of talk about on both sides of the lane that you're on is like, as you get like different things into the catalog that aren't really, the horror element, it's like, do you work on ways to try to sell things to theaters like, hey, you should give this a try? Like, it might not be like the hot button thing now, but you could make it the hot button thing by just taking a chance and screening it.
Yeah, I think it is possible to put your thumb on the scale for things like that. If you have all the assets that give the theater an easier time to sell it, like for a good example is a movie that we had. It was the biggest hit of ours in 2022, and then it hit a right snag, but we're getting it back soon. Is Thrilling Bloody Sword, which is a Taiwanese wuxia kung fu thing, which is wilder than your typical wizard battle type of movie. It's got enough elements that equal, maybe not a Miami Connection, but something that can talk to people on that level. It's got this insane ripoff of money, 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 money. Like there's this funk drop that comes in once every 10 minutes, every 5 minutes, and it's the same cue, and it's a ripoff of like an American song, and it's hilarious every time. It's part Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, part wizard battle, part like dumbbell comedy. It's an insane movie. So I put my thumb on the scale for that because I watched it and went, wow, this is nuts. I think I can see it's got enough audience moments, reel by reel, to really hit with a crowd who's not expecting it. And I booked it like 30 places, and then I had to withdraw it, and it's coming back soon. But I know it's like you got to give them the killer trailer. Or Der Fan is another example. That's a movie that I went after as a single title rather than a library, because I knew I could contact the owner, the rights holder, and I made a case, and we got the movie. So I had to then, to prove to him that we are making good on our promise to try to get it at play, I cut a trailer and I say to the venues, here's this movie, here's the trailer, here's the screener. I really think you should consider Der Fan at some point this year for your rep series, because it's gonna hit. It's going to wipe away the young crowd who's never seen anything quite like that, which is like a little bit of a is it a female empowerment movie? Maybe.
It's one of my favorite, why rock stars shouldn't be shitty to their fan movies. It's a good cannibal movie. It's a lot of, at one point this year, before I had to like pivot and change my whole lineup, I wanted to show Der Fan around Valentine's Day. I think I might do it for this upcoming Valentine's Day.
Oh, do it. All the under 30 people will really appreciate it. So I did it at Alamo, and there's 50 people in the room, and rarely do people hang around the room after the movie's over because they want to get their parking validated and get out.
Yeah.
But people stuck around and talked about Japan way more than most of the things I show. So I really feel it has the power to sock people.
It's a really good movie. It has a really good '80s soundtrack. It's very it's very well done. I was gonna say something. It's like sneaky in how it kind of unfolds as it unfolds, but like it's just a really impressive film. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of the fun. The other fun part of repertory cinema is like things you discover and getting people to discover it, and like opening someone's world to something that they may or may not want to see. But we both know sometimes that's hard. Where like, you know, you're in a business where you have to sell tickets, so like obviously you want to take a chance on something, like hope people will come out for a screening, but then at the same time you also have to be prepared to duck and cover, like, well, guess it's Friday 13th again for a week.
Yeah. As programmers, we do have to balance the tough sells with the hits in order to keep the thing at an even keel and not, you know, make yourself cumbersome to the organization you're doing that thing for.
Now, another thing you've kind of like I've seen AGFA do, and like if you're depending on how much your involvement is, obviously you might not be answered, but like you've also worked on like traveling series. You've done something with Joe Bob with his like drive-in thing with was it a double feature of the brain and brain damage and things like that. Do you want to talk about how that stuff came about?
Sure. I mean, out of the blue, I got a email from Joe Bob's agent, or no, his assistant, Tracy. And she said, we've heard about you from somewhere, probably through talking with a venue that they were thinking about doing a show at. And maybe the booker said to them, oh, AGFA has a bunch of horror movies. So they got in touch with me, and I set up a meeting. And it's one of the great perks of this job is I talked to Joe Bob for an hour on the phone with his team. And I made the pitch that they should go with us kind of exclusively to do whenever he hosts a rep show, they should try to do it exclusively from us because we'll make it easy and affordable for the venue to do it. Because I know that with him, giving him the bulk of the ticket sales rather than me taking a cut of the door is the way to keep the relationship cool and keeps money flowing for everybody. So I just decided to not, because when you're a distributor and a venue wants to book a movie, a lot of the times you say a guarantee versus a percentage. I'm sure you've covered this on the show at some point, but it bears repeating that.
Yeah, please repeat it, because like, you know, obviously I don't expect, you know, I know people have listened to the podcast episode, but this is an important thing that I think bears repeating. So go ahead and explain the percentage versus the guarantee.
So you don't want to just take a straight cut of the door because you don't know how well the show is going to do some of the time. And you don't want to sometimes just take a straight cut of the door because what if they sell it out? So you can hedge your bet and give them terms that are a guarantee versus a percentage. Usually, let's say an industry average is 250 versus 35%. That means that if you don't hit $750 in box office, then you just pay the guaranteed minimum that we all agreed to, which is 250. And if they go over $750 in box office, then it tips over into 35%. You do the math and you understand how these numbers work. And sometimes I'm fucking wowed by like, oh my God, I didn't know the venue in Tacoma, the Blue Mouse, I got to give them a shout out. They get over 100 people to see things like Graduation Day. I'm like, that is what is needed in this economy, is people getting into weird, dumb shit that they've probably never seen before because there's someone on the ground who can sell it the right way and all those things, you know? Yeah, so I knew that I didn't want to do a versus and just charge a flat rate so that it's easier for the booking to just get solidified. And the more bookings he gets solidified, the more he's out on the road, and the more he's out on the road, the more he gets gigs, and it's good for everybody all around. So that's how that worked. Yeah.
So I kind of want to talk about something else that kind of comes out of that. Now, obviously Joe Bob's on a bigger level than, you know, most film programmers, but you and I have had many discussions about the next evolution of film programmers as the traveling film programmer who, you know, works with other venues and like might have a home base but kind of travels around.
Yeah. To me, that was in the modern age. That is Eddie Mueller from Noir City figured out how to make that happen, and it's also with like a fashion component. So
yeah,
I guess he was like he was like a proto influencer. And there's all kinds of folks, including yourself, who now go around the country and bring their sensibility and promotion to other venues.
And I kind of think it's a good thing. I you know, it's like, you know, I'm hoping, I've had Kay Lynch from Salem Horror Fest come host something. I'm hoping to have Mark Anastasio from the Coolidge. He should be here in September for the Boston Series he program. But I like the idea of like programmers kind of going around, moving around, because then you get, it kind of allows towns to see how programming is elsewhere, and also just like, it's also building a community, because like there's not a lot of, that might seem like there's a lot of movie theaters and stuff, but there's not a lot of film programmers or genre film programmers and stuff. I guess maybe it's kind of hard because we definitely have that pandemic pocket in there too. But have you noticed a growth in film programmers over the last few years?
Oh yeah. 10 years ago, no one knew what it was to be a programmer because it isn't such a not public facing job. And recently, I think there's a lot of institutions in the country that have made film programming seem exciting as programmers try to revitalize the scene. Let's take New York, for example. What happened in like 2015, 16, 17, 18 with the Metrograph and the Quad, specifically in Manhattan, that was a really interesting game of brinksmanship, which I thought resulted in this golden age of rep out there nationwide, and certainly in Austin. Alamo Drafthouse did a ton of things. In LA, there was Cinefamily. And yeah, it's places like the Beacon in Seattle more recently, where Tommy Swenson, who used to work in Austin for Alamo Drafthouse, moved back to his hometown, started a new place, has an interesting scene going at his place. Nellie Killian, who used to be at BAM in New York, went back to her home in San Francisco where she grew up, and now she's about to start a new venue there, just like the Beacon. It's a combination of people going itinerant style around the country and micro cinemas popping up in places where you don't expect them to, and giving a real interesting movie voice to a city where it's needed sometimes. It's a wild thing. And then people migrating from the festival world over to the sort of 24/7 programming stuff, and then vice versa. It's a wild time. I love it. I think all of our colleagues at all these places and the people who go around and do it too, I think it's a really interesting bunch of people. It's who I like to hang out with.
Now, kind of talking about that, we talked about a little bit about what you do at the Draft House, but I want to, talk about Museum of Home Video. Do you want to talk about how that came about?
Oh, sure. Museum of Home Video is a thing that I do every Tuesday night. It's a live stream which started on Twitch in the pandemic era and now is on our own URL, museumofhomevideo.com. And it is a weekly found footage variety show where the thesis is the history of showbiz. Anything that is kind of like entertainment-y, like old talk show clips or game shows, commercials, cut downs of movies where it's boring for 2 hours, but it's really exciting for 15 minutes. Stuff like that. I guess the closest comparison is Everything is Terrible, which they definitely helped inform what I do now. It started in July of 2020. Originally, it was to be a live show here in LA every Saturday at 4 p.m. I haven't gotten to do that, but we pivoted during the lockdown, and I do it every week. And now it's an entire channel. Basically, I was hugely inspired by Weird Al and UHF, so I decided to do that as best I could and sort of marry it with a college radio template. So our channel has a bunch of shows that broadcast on a linear schedule like television used to be. And it's my great joy. It's also my video therapy because I get to work out all the weird ghosts from my childhood in video form.
That's actually really interesting, working out the ghost of your childhood through video, because like I definitely like have things that have been stuck with me that have informed where I'm at and what I do now. So it's
yeah. I mean, you wouldn't be doing a movie about you wouldn't be doing a series about sleazy movies if you didn't grow up watching a bunch of sleazy movies.
Exactly. The things you watch when you're young really do inform me. I actually started doing a YouTube series where I kind of talk about, like, I pick individual movies that I remember if I have a good story around how I saw them and how like it either fucked me up or where it took me to, or if it like influenced me when I was in bands and stuff like that. Because like the thing is, I think film programmers all love movies and they all have a different relationship of how they got into it and that kind of stuff. And I feel like there's a lot of like, I was talking to Nick, who I did the podcast, but there's a lot of movie meme things where I feel like there's people that will meme a movie but like have no context or love for the actual movie or cinema in general. It's all like transactional, like, Instagram likes or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I kind of want to see people get back to like it's more than an image you find on Pinterest. It's a work of art, regardless if it's fucking Things or if it's like Brewster McCloud or Nashville or like Lawrence Arabia, or I had to throw things because things can be a work of art. The song, the Tailspin song, is one of the greatest songs in a movie ever, and will get stuck in your head and melt your mind and ruin you for the rest of your life.
Right. You've never seen a movie till you've seen a Barry Gillis movie. It's true.
So now, we talked about a lot what you're doing now, but I do want to ask you, how did you stumble into the weird world of film programming? Because like it's not a traditional thing that most people like. Maybe now there's people that are like, I want to be a film programmer, and they try to figure out how to do that. But like decade or so ago, or even before that, it wasn't something that you just said, this is what I'm gonna do. It's something you casually just kind of fell into or ended up in.
Mm-hmm. It's something I fell into. I did not plan to do it. Everyone when they're young, everyone thinks that they're going to be a filmmaker, and that's for some people and not for others. For me, it was unimportant because I realized what a political competition it was to get a movie made, and I thought, I don't want to do that. I'll just work in a video store. So I was a manager at Cinephile Video throughout my whole 20s, throughout all the 2000s. And then the co-owner of the video store, this is in Los Angeles, the co-owner of Cinephile, Hadrian, went off to start Cinefamily at the Silent Movie Theater, a place that I had gone to see silent movies at in high school in the 90s. And then it didn't really occur to me that that was a career, because the two most important rep houses to me growing up in LA were the New Bev and the Silent Movie Theater. And in both instances, it was a single middle-aged to elderly person who ran the operation. The operation was just one person. With the New Bev, it was the late Sherman Torgan. And you would go to the show and he'd be selling the ticket a lot of the time. And he's the one who you understand is like, oh, this is his place. So it wasn't as if film programming was a career. I didn't understand that at LACMA or American Cinematheque, there were people whose job it was to come in professionally just to do that. And I stumbled into it through Cinefamily, and Hadrian he knew how hard of a worker I was. So I got tapped to be a programmer and then director of programming, which was really a position for me at that place that was more like an air traffic controller. And you learn to think of movies and the aesthetic choice of choosing them more as a functional decision than an aesthetic decision. And I don't know, lots of things that I learned at Cinephile and Cinefamily that I do still use to this day, but I sort of like invert the script. And now that I'm in distribution, I try to think of I try to empathetically figure out what the venue person is going through and how much they're paying for movies, and try to make it a pleasant experience for them.
Kind of going back to being with your for AGFA, it's like, I'm not trying, if this is spilling the secret sauce a little bit, but like obviously there's a fee that comes with it, either percentage or flat, but you do have a little bit of a sliding scale depending on like what the venue size is, who it is, if they're, even if they're just doing a Blu-ray screening and stuff like that. Can you talk about just like, giving access to like theaters or like micro cinemas, or just again someone doing a one-off screening on like a weird offsite, like a bar or like a I don't know, like a club or something like that?
I feel that as a distributor, you absolutely have to have a different pricing structure for micro cinemas that have 30-ish seats in their single room than you do a bustling art house in a metropolis, let's say. You can't charge the same rate, because the micro cinema will never book anything with you again if you charge the same rate. If you charge a rate that's more than 100% of what the entire door take would be if they sold out, they're only going to book with you if you have something in your catalog that they absolutely devastatingly have to have. We have so many movies that I can't block access like that. It would be counterintuitive, I feel. And I just have to price things lower for a room that has 30 seats, because I want them to keep booking for me. It's both mission driven, because we're a nonprofit. I don't know if we mentioned that.
No, we didn't. So, but yeah, I guess I should say the AGFA is a nonprofit. So like basically the way it's structured, it's like, everything that goes in goes back into the organization, which is like acquiring new movies. Like obviously AGFA also has their own scanner, and they scan stuff. And there's also the film archive still, which is still a component.
Yeah, and then we do lend out 35 under strict conditions, There's
Yeah.
only so many things that meet archival conditions in the first place. But what were we talking about? I'm sorry.
Oh no, I guess we were talking about price structure because like
Oh,
that's
price
another.
structure. Yeah.
Yeah, because like when like I meet someone that wants to get into film programming and they're looking at what the stuff, I always tell them go to AGFA first because
Oh, right.
one, I know you have a huge catalog of bangers and like it's like it's easier, if you have Reanimator as an option, you don't have to go try to do a studio thing where you're going to get charged an arm and a leg. Maybe not
Yeah.
arm and a leg, but there's
250
yeah,
by indifferent distributor who doesn't think to ask how many seats there are or whatever.
yeah. So it's like I think like when one of the most beneficial places for someone that wants to get into film programming, specifically genre film programming, is like go to AGFA and start from there because then you get a whole library of stuff. You do DCPs. I know you send drives, but you also can do digital downloads too, correct?
Yeah. So what I say to anyone who wants advice is find the brewery or the bar in your town that has an existing AV system, because maybe they already show movies, or maybe they do a trivia night or karaoke or whatever. So go to the bar and say, if you'll cover the cost of licensing the movie, I will guarantee, and this is very important, do a free admission show. If you cover the cost of licensing the bar, I will guarantee to bring 20 or 30 people in to buy at least one drink in your bar, as they have free admission to come in and see the movie in your bar. To me, that is the most absolutely mutually beneficial relationship to get yourself off the ground as possible. So if you don't do that, then you're just making it harder on yourself, whether it's like, oh, but I want to do it in the local library. Don't do it in the bar. Because the bar will pay for the fucking license fee, so you don't have to pay out of pocket. And that way you can experiment with a wider range of movies and get a wider range of people, and maybe have a wider range of co-promoters, because that's also important. You want to get your local, if there's a college radio station in your town, get a fucking DJ from there to come spin, so they'll talk about it on their show. Things like that will help draw more people than just to the thing. And I'm compelled to make these movies affordable for people who want to do that, because this is how the next generation, like you said, of rep cinema bookers happens. And without it, it's all just like this monk-like hidden behavior behind closed doors. And I don't like that, because this is not rocket science. It's a mixture of creativity and entrepreneurial stuff, and how social you are. Because if you're a social person, you'll be able to get more people to come to your shit than a non-social person.
I was going to ask you, where do you see the future rep cinema heading? Like, do you see like more micro cinemas? Do you see like more alternative venues? Do you see like established theaters just keep continuing growing the audience and like new people coming in? Because one thing I do want to mention is like, streaming wise, if you go to Shudder and places like that, a lot of the AGFA catalog, because of different distribution deals like Severin, Vinegar Syndrome, Arrow, have their own streaming services or have licensed this stuff. So this stuff is available to watch if you have a Shudder subscription. But there's definitely a side where people will go out and see stuff. Like, is it that people are tired of streaming curation and just, or there is, I think both will exist, but like I just kind of want to get your perspective on like where you think repertory is going to head in the long haul.
Yes to all those points you mentioned. I guess we could go through them one by one.
Yeah.
Certainly, with the death of video stores, choosing what to watch has become an agonizing, endless process. Whereas if you went to the video store, you had to choose, or you wouldn't come home with a movie. You could spend all night there if you wanted to, but you kind of wanted to see a movie, so you better pick at some point. So streaming allows me to fucking waste time that I want back of just scrolling, and rep cinema is the only way to just pick a movie with someone else having done the picking for you, and you don't have to think about it. So I think that's a really interesting novelty that will not wear off as time goes on, because video stores are not en masse coming back. There are ones in pockets of the country, but it's not like they're everywhere. And I just think that there's more and more people who post lockdown still savor the idea of going out and doing something unplanned. Like we talked about Barbie earlier. I saw it on opening weekend unplanned, because a friend said, I want to go. You want to come? So it's just a vehicle for unplanned, spontaneous fun. I think access to more and more and more movies through restorations is just creating more and more future rep cinema bookers. And that's very exciting to me. It's why part of my interpretation of AGFA's mission is to aid all the labels doing restorations and to support them by having these screenings, because what they do is so important access wise for young film fans or any film fan. And I think that a new savvy crop of people at venues across the world are getting better at networking and finding, digging, doing the Columbo work. And it's a very exciting, rich tapestry of people. And I personally believe in this strata of people and their ability to fucking kill it, because I'm seeing everybody be successful everywhere.
That is really perfect. Kind of harkening back to your programming hat of this thing, on the programming side of the things, is there any particular screenings that you put together and hosted over the years that, you know, always kind of stayed with you, really memorable, whether it be a guest or because it was a rare print or anything like that? Do you have any of those that kind of like you hold on to?
A lot of them are from Cinefamily, because there was it was a stretch of years where if we got a hold of some famous filmmaker or actor or whomever's like publicist's email, there's a good chance that they might show up, because it was LA and, you know, we had a certain juice to the place, like notoriety wise, I guess. So I got to do a whole 3-hour Q&A with Dr. Domeno. That was really fun. You know, he was a childhood hero that wasn't a prick, so that was nice. Another childhood hero who was also very nice, and I just bow down to, his Bobcat Goldthwait. I got to do a couple Q&As with him. Vernon Chapman, the creator of a co-creator of Wonder Shows and Xavier Renegade Angel, The Heart She Holler. I did a couple with him. He was fantastic. I adore him. Recently in Alamo, it was a pick that I wasn't expecting to be so resonant with me, but Jake Fogelnest, another podcaster and writer and performer, his favorite movie is Times Square. So we did Times Square because Universal has a new restoration, which looked fantastic. Hats off to, I'm going to name drop Jason Jakowski from Universal, who does a bang up job of their repertory operations. It was nice to give a really resonant screening to Jake, because he came out to participate, and also the movie hit way harder than I thought it would, because I realized I hadn't actually watched it in full ever, and it's almost like an Antonioni movie. It's very stark and deep and really fucked up, and I appreciated it, and it has the punk stuff in it too. So that was really resonant. We did a screening of the Gong Show movie and had Artie Johnson show up. Artie Johnson and Rip Taylor. That was back in Cinefamily. That was like 2010. It was real wild. I grew to hate Rip Taylor. I hate to be hateful of a dead person, but he was the most assholish personality I ever dealt with, ever, from a celebrity at Cinefamily, ever. That was wild. I got to meet Robert Downey Sr. when we did a tribute to him in 2014. A couple of us got to go out to breakfast with him. That was fucking aces. I still remember him like perfectly, beautifully sitting in the corner of this restaurant to this day. I don't know. There's too many to go through. That's kind of one of the benefits of living in LA, is you do get to see a lot of people come, you know, see shit. What are some of yours recently? Like the last 12 months, what are some of yours?
You know, I gotta think, like, one of the coolest things I got to do recently was back in November, did a whole string of movies with Jonathan Kaplan, with him there. So we did Truck Turner, we did Student Teachers, and then we ended with Over the Edge, and Tim Hunter came out, and one of the actors showed up too. And that was really terrific, because I've never done I've done Q&As with people multiple times, but I'd never done like a series where it's like every week I'm coming back and I'm talking to them about a different movie and like trying to keep things fresh. And like it was one of the most rewarding things, because like, I guess Jonathan Kaplan didn't really do these too often. So it was like, just kind of really cool that he actually came out and like was willing. He was a little embarrassed by Student Teachers, but you know, 70s Roger Corman sexploitation, I get it. But
when I saw Over the Edge 20 years ago at the Egyptian, Tim Hunter was there and Matt Dillon was there, but not Jonathan Kaplan. So yeah, that is quite rare.
There was that. Also last year, I did The Changeling with Peter Medic and Joel B. Michaels, the producer, and like there was just something really touching and like sincere about Peter Medic talking about that movie in a
Mhm.
way that like I wasn't prepared for, because like he was a little emotional about just like the magic of cinema. And it's like, I love The Changeling. It's a great little ghost story with George C. Scott and all, but like it just hit this emotional high that like I wasn't really expecting.
Mhm.
And just kind of get in it. Like I kind of love those moments. I'm trying to think of what I was like. I did Beastmaster with Don Coscarelli and Paul Peppermint and the composer, and like it kind of felt like Don was getting his like felt like he was felt vindicated because it finally had that nice 4K restoration, which we had to. That was one we had to jump through hoops. We had to get a hold of the was it a billionaire on a yacht that owns Beastmaster, Evil Speak, and Unfaded Black.
And he lives in Istanbul or something like
Yeah,
that.
we like Don gave us one email and he didn't answer. He's like, "We'll try this other email," and then we're like, "Hey, can we clear lights?" Like, I don't care. But apparently, like, if anyone else ever tried it, like that guy shuts them down and like threatens lawsuits like crazy. So it was kind of cool to do Beastmaster and like Don getting to see the restoration on a big screen.
One that I just remembered is maybe one of the most. It certainly typifies my time at Cinefamily, and it was early on, so I wasn't expecting to roll into something this insane. John Avildsen Q&A for Neighbors.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. So we were doing in like a Thursday night slot. This is back in the early days of Cinefamily when it was Wednesday nights are this, and Thursday nights are this, and Friday nights are this. And it kind of like every Wednesday in the month was something, and it stuck with that, whatever theme was. So whatever month it was double bills by famous auteurs where people hadn't seen the movies enough. So it was a double feature of John Avildsen's mid-70s Burt Reynolds hee-haw type comedy that he did right before Rocky.
I can't remember what it is, but I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and then Neighbors is the second on the double bill. So he showed up almost at the end of the Burt Reynolds movie. And the thing that is the same between both of these two John Avildsen films is he absolutely was at odds with the star the entire time. So he came in and watched the last third of the Burt Reynolds movie, and while the credits were rolling, I remember him taking out his phone and like filming the screen of the end credits rolling of this Burt Reynolds movie that he made. And then we get up there and I do a 15-minute Q&A with him introing Neighbors, and if you haven't seen it, maybe keep it that way. It's a deeply unfunny early 80s comedy from an era where all comedies were kind of deeply unfunny at the time because of cocaine specifically. So it's John Avildsen directing Belushi and Aykroyd, and both of them are completely out of control, and there was no way that he could like keep it together to make like a cohesive movie. So it was a very brutally honest Q&A about Belushi and his time in the early 80s and all that. So that one really sticks out in my mind. It's like, I can't believe I got to do that.
Now on the flip side, we've both hosted screenings, but things go wrong. Prince break, guest no show, technical problems. Like
technical problems. Don't get me started. Oh my God.
I was gonna ask you, like, is there any screenings that you remember that just almost made you like, why the fuck am I doing this? And I should just get a different job.
Well, I'll describe a problem, and it's like the same kind of problem, and it's a good example and a bad example. So as is the problem with a lot of 35 reel-to-reel changeover gear in everywhere, over the decades, film prints, they'll shrink by like a millimeter.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is an optical soundtrack, the optical soundtrack won't fully be aligned with the reader anymore, which gives you the dreaded
the lawnmower sound.
Yeah, the cyclical rotating lawnmower sound that's at an interval of every 2 seconds, and that makes it fully impossible for you to ignore it. So for so long we were like down to one projector at Cinefamily, where we'd have to take. So instead of keeping the audience in darkness and doing a Q&A at the end of this near 4-hour ordeal or whatever the hell it was, screening this movie, I decided that we would do the Q&A in between every reel break. So we would do a Q&A for 3 minutes at a time across what was like 9 reels or something, 8 reels, and we would do a sequential Q&A based upon the reel we just seen.
That's kind of like turning lemons and lemonade there, because that's actually kind of cool. other than
Yes,
like being
I think
one one of the hardest ways to watch a movie. But I think that's a good way to do it, because then it's like, all right, talk about what you did for that, or like what went on with the editing process for like that grip of scenes or whatever.
yes, it's almost something psychotic, like they would do at a festival on
Yeah.
purpose, or something. So that was really fun, and I encourage more people to be creative with their tech failures and how they deal with the audience and the audience expectations when dealing with them. That audio shit is really the worst, and there's nothing that gives you a sinking feeling in your stomach more than when you're sitting in the crowd to watch the movie that you hosted and programmed, and then suddenly something terribly goes wrong with the projection, and you have to sprint up the stairs like a madman in order to get to
Mm-hmm.
the, because maybe that you'll tell them what it is before they even notice it.
Mm-hmm. When I was more on the theater managing side, the amount of times I had to like make the mad dash up to the booth when like something was going off, like, you know, a dowser closed on accident because there was something wrong. Like, you know, it's the beauty and the danger of 35 millimeter projection, because there's no parts for any of these things left. It's basically scavenge to save them. So when shit goes bad, it gets scary.
Yeah, yeah. The most intense the show must go on thing that I've ever personally had to do was all throughout the month in 2012 at Cinefamily, when we did it, Andrei Zulawski, or Zhuwowski, I think it's how it's actually pronounced, a whole retrospective on him. And he was slated to appear, and I was over the moon because I was like, I get to do a Q&A with Zulawski for On the Silver Globe. My life is complete.
Mm-hmm.
Like, holy shit. And then at the last minute, he canceled. And
Oh,
so it was just, but we still sold out every show of every movie, including 3 screenings of On the Silver Globe. It was really nice. I cut some really good trailers for those. It was a good triumph on all our parts. But fuck, we had to soft subtitle, I think, 4 of them.
oh no.
And we had a really interesting so for those who don't know, when you get a film print or a DCP or whatever the material is that has just in the native language with no subtitles or dubbing, you have to provide your own subtitles, and you can
Mm-hmm.
do this a variety of ways. Because we had a VJ on staff, one of our programmers was also a professional VJ for like music performers. He had these DVD turntables that were made by Pioneer in the booth, and the soft subtitling would be accomplished through the Pioneer decks and a monitor. So we would have the movie running as a reference on a little monitor in the booth on one deck, and on the other deck was just a DVD that had a black screen with the subtitles on it. And so some of these movies, I had to download the SRT subtitle files off of dodgy sources, and then I get it in, and I'm all set to burn the disc for the subtitles to be projected on screen, when I realize, oh God, there's some formatting error, and every line has punctuation that needs to be deleted, or else it's unreadable. So the show was almost an hour late to start, because what I thought was going to take me an hour and a half took me 4 straight hours of being Data from Next Generation, going,
Oh god.
being Philip Glass with my fucking laptop keyboard and making this SRT file readable so that we can then burn it, so we can then project it. And we had to do this for 4 different movies. The last one was the most difficult. It was his opera, which had never been translated into English. So
Oh
what I
god.
had was from a torrent site. I had a VHS bootleg copy that it was in Russian with hard-coded Polish subs, and I had an SRT in what might have been English, what might have been French or something, and the timing of the subtitles did not match the timing of the subtitles
Oh god.
in the reference. So I had to spend 6 p.m. to 6 a.m., a full 12 hours nonstop, because the show was the next day, and I had to translate the movie using Google Translate in like there's 2 competing languages which aren't English, and I have to figure out what I'm translating these lines into.
Oh my god.
So that 60 people can see this show once.
I mean, I've had to do soft subbing for January Giallo for all the Italian prints, but usually because a lot of those have had decent releases, they have subtitle tracks.
Yeah, yeah.
Although
Now in 2023, I'm sure it's a tad easier.
it is a tad easier, but goddamn, it like having, you know, worked on the DCP creation things and trying to line up subtitles and like, oh my fucking god, that.
Oh, and the print, might be missing 3 seconds.
Yeah, and then it throws everything off. Yeah,
and it throws your whole subtitle thing out. That's why we use the DJ decks, because you could quickly rewind and fast forward using a hand gesture. And
I
it was an
might,
interesting
I might,
home cook situation.
I might have to suggest that some of the venues, like when we did a Lizard and Women's Skin, like the Technicolor Italian print, we did okay, but there was definitely a segment that, like, I don't know if it was because it was dub titles or something. There was a bunch of dialogue that didn't belong anywhere in the movie anymore.
Mhm.
So it's
Oh
just like,
yeah, another one of the Zulawski movies. One of the subtitle files had a 5-minute gap in it out of nowhere, and there's dialogue that's just pouring out. So the poor manager on duty, who was tasked with soft subbing the movie, had to we had to stop the screening, and then we had to ghostly project the image of the DVD reference subtitles. So we're projecting the movie on top of the movie, and
oh
then
my God.
matting out everything but the subtitles, and that doesn't work, and the audience is revolting against the fucking theater, and it was insane. And it was like a hot summer night, and it was a packed room, and fuck. Oh, I get
Yeah.
freaked out just thinking about that still.
I guess kind of to move away from disasters, but like to kind of end on a more positive note. Is there any white whales that you're still looking for screen wise? Maybe acquiring for AGFA or something that you still want to screen and see in a theater? Is there like a movie that just like has kind of just evaded you for whatever reason?
Good question. I could say a few things that are just like rights issues, and that's kind of a boring story. So I guess it's like, what is there no materials on
Mm-hmm.
at all? My philosophy with record collecting and
Yeah.
disc collecting or book collecting is like, don't go out seeking things. Just keep swimming, and things will float to you, and you can choose what to grab from what floats towards you. So I take that approach with downloading material for Museum of Home Video, because it's like, when the thesis is all of recorded human activity, like how do you narrow it down? You just keep coming across things that float in the ocean. You don't really go down too deep and below the water. I think like Durfan was actually a big one that we solved, that I'm very proud of. Just making that one easier to do. It would probably end up being something where there's a print stored in a vault that is too difficult to get into, like permissions wise, where it's like, oh, the only print of this that I know of is stuck behind some non-lending policy at an institution somewhere. I don't know. It's like most mysteries I feel have been solved at this point. It's like either Studio Canal is the answer to the mystery, or the person to ask passed away, so now you don't know whom to ask. Those do come up, although perhaps they're coming up more for you than they are for me.
More probably recent stuff. I mean, the kind of ones I'm looking for, I want to be able to screen like.
Well, I guess Russ Meyer is a great sort of
Yeah.
technical example. Like, it's difficult to get those out.
Yeah. I mean, I think my I've actually like doing Lizard Women's Skin this year was like a white layup. That was one. I would love to be able to do Roller Coaster in 70, even though I know those don't exist. Those went up in that Universal Fire back in 08 with most of the Sense Around prints. But I've been happy to show the DCP of it because I don't know. That was my weirdo movie, The Champion, and get people to actually come and sell out screens of. So I guess another question for you, maybe not on the White Whale, what's a movie that actually you kind of already answered it, but like, did you always have a personal movie that you grew up with or had with you that you wanted people to see and just were able to get like a good audience for? Because I have two sides of this. Roller Coaster was the one I got to work. Bill Heinzman's The Flesh Eater did not work for me.
Wow. And that's kind of a, you showed around Halloween because it's set on Halloween, a little bit of a stunty.
Yeah, I showed it the second year I did Cinematic Void. I showed Harry Guerrero's 35 millimeter print of it, and I was like, "Come on, man! It's Bill Heinzman, Night of the Living Dead. Him writing, starring, directing, and it's set on Halloween. George Romero and Richard P. Rubenstein tried to sue him, but they really couldn't because the character was in the public domain. Like it was, I had this whole pitch, and like I think I did like 30 people in the Spielberg for it. It was like one of my lower attended shows at that time. I couldn't get Flesh Eater to work, but I got Roller Coaster to work. So out of the two ridiculous movies I've championed, maybe a little too much.
Quite a few of these white whales that haunted me throughout childhood have been unearthed and ended up in my catalog, like the Peanut Butter Solution, which specifically destroyed me through repeated viewings on HBO as a child. And then all of a sudden, Severin is doing. I did pester David Gregory at Severin once. It was a lunch, I think pre-pandemic, where it was like me and Joe Rubin from Vinegar Syndrome and Lisa Petrucci. Maybe she was there from Something Weird, and Kayla Jennings was also there. Where I was seated next to David, and I just looked at him towards the end of the lunch, and I went, "My man, the peanut butter solution." And he said, "Oh, somebody else told me about that one too. It was probably Kayla." So they ended up licensing the peanut butter solution, and again, it sits in my catalog. That's very exciting. White Whale stuff, not from childhood, but definitely from my early days of, oh my God, you can get bootlegs of movies, was Remember My Name. That was very satisfying to show to people, Cinefamily. The Abel Ferrara Body Snatchers was another one where I saw it when I was younger, and I thought, oh fuck, I would love to show this to more people. And then I think it has found somewhat of an audience. It's pretty fun. So there's just idiosyncratic personal picks that like, or Simply Irresistible is maybe another one that I got obsessed with a couple years ago, and ended up getting 50 people to trudge out on a Wednesday at 10:30 p.m. in the rain in San Francisco at Alamo. We showed that on 35. That was a triumph to get that many people under that many adverse conditions.
I mean, that's the funniest thing about LA. You want to know how you can your screening where people are going to no show? Rain.
Yeah, and 50 diehard Buffy fans came out in the rain to see this strange ass movie. Have you seen this one?
I have not seen this one. Now I got to kind of see. I'll put it on my list of things.
It's nominally it's a rom-com, but it goes in different directions.
That's my kind of rom-com. My last question for you is, I asked you about the future repertory cinema. What do you see as the future of AGFA moving forward? Are you going to acquire more movies for the library? Are you going to continue, the Blu-ray label's going to continue? Is the archive plus the scanning and all those things? Like, where do you see the bigger picture of AGFA in the next like 2 to 5 years or something like that?
Something that I really want to get into, that I have talked to my teammates about, and it's really up to me to have that extra energy to pull off, would be to somehow compete in the space that Fathom Events does, where we take one thing out and we do it for one weekend only, and we put it on a couple hundred screens all at once, as opposed to gathering the screenings Super Mario Brothers style, where I'm just looking for the coins in different places. I would love for all the coins to converge in one weekend. I don't know if we have anything big enough in our library to really, truly pull that off with. I would love to get to the point where we can acquire things theatrically to do that with, or at the very least, license things for a short window to accomplish that with, because that's what Fathom does. And I would love to know how to jump to that level of theatrical distribution, because I think it's just the next level of growth for us. On the disc front, just being able to go to a studio like Vinegar Syndrome or Severin and say, we would love to license a package of titles. We're not there yet, but we'll hopefully be there soon with enough consistency. Like, with hosting a podcast, you got to consistently put out episodes, or it's like, or don't do it. So the consistency with scaling up our disc releases, I think, will definitely help us achieve the Fathom Event style thing, where we're suddenly talking to studios about licensing regularly rather than us being scared about it, which I think we are, because we don't know how to talk their language. Oh, this reminds me of a White Whale thing. You cannot book the Rob Zombie MUNSTERS, which I enjoyed and wanted to do a rep screening of.
Really?
Yeah, but I don't know if they have theatrical rights on this movie. I don't know, because they did not honor the request to book it. They said it was impossible for whatever reason.
That's interesting though. When I would circle back in a little bit, because is it because it was sold directly to streaming? Is that what it was?
It is a game of telephone. I wasn't told directly. So I don't know, but I think that the movie is charming enough that it's almost a hangout movie, Altman style. It's like there's no plot. You're just hanging out with the Munsters for 2 hours, and it is overlong. It's 2 hours, but I was sufficiently charmed enough that I would continue ordering popcorn or a beer while watching it. And it's the only time I've ever enjoyed a Rob Zombie movie. I cannot believe I'm saying this for the record,
I still haven't seen it. I mean, I am morbidly curious about it, because it's just like, I feel like at this point he has no fucks left to give. So it's like, actually, I don't think he's ever had fucks to give. So he's just making what he wants to make for himself.
I thought it had a What We Do in the Shadows type charm to it, where it's like, okay, this joke didn't land or that joke didn't land, but you enjoy staring at the characters. There's a Nosferatu character that Lily Munster keeps dating at the beginning of the origin story of the movie, and he's like a funny. It feels like a Taika Waititi type movie to me.
That's kind of an interesting way to look at it. The thing I was most excited about was when I saw Daniel Roebuck. Daniel Roebuck was playing Grandpa Munster, because
Yes.
we both have interacted with Daniel and like know how much he fucking loves that shit.
Yeah, I mean, he's perfectly cast. I mean, I don't know. At least it wasn't Devil's Rejects 3 or
Yeah.
something.
No, I feel like if anything, even without seeing the movie, the one takeaway I have for it is like, goddamn, I'm glad to see Daniel Roebuck so happy playing something that he was born and would absolutely, annihilate playing in the best way possible.
Mm-hmm.
I think that has answered all my questions. Bret, where can people find you and AGFA on the World Wide Web?
AmericanGenreFilm.com is where you can find AGFA. MuseumofHomeVideo.com is where you can find my weekly live stream. I'm not too much of a promoter of my own stuff, and I should change that. But Museum of Home Video really is, if you love found footage in any way, whether it's mashups on YouTube, whether it's Everything is Terrible or TV Carnage, or I don't know, The Soup, if you watched The Soup on E ever, and you loved all the weird found footage pieces they do, it's just 2.5 hours of that every Tuesday. And I stealing a line from Weird Al from UHF, it's the reason television was invented.
You also have a Patreon for Museum of Hope Video,
Yes.
correct?
Yes, and you can rewatch any episode. I'm on episode 156. That was last night. And it's 2.5 hours every episode, and it's all killer shit. You could do better than to ignore Museum of Video. So I don't know. And it's appointment viewing. We don't have that anymore in our lives, and it's a real novelty. And a bunch of my friends and also people who have found the show, it's their Tuesday night ritual. So get in on it.
But thank you so much, Bret.
Yeah, I've enjoyed this conversation a lot, and I think that you understand every problem that I've had as a venue booker, and have dealt with every problem that exists in the distribution side of things. So it's rare that I get to talk to someone who just feels it in their marrow like you do. So I've always appreciated our chats.
Awesome. Thank you so much.